Okay, so before I begin, you're probably noticing that the wall is changing. There's a lot of new stuff, a lot of stuff missing. Look, this thing is a living thing unto its own, and it's going to keep changing. There's new things coming, new things going, and that's all I have to say about it. Now, on to my review.
We're going to war.
You're alone! Born to be with Dredd!
Mr. I am the... We got a lot in common. I'll be the judge of that.
Dredd, look
I got in an odd mood the other day. I decided, hey, you know what I should do? I should do a double feature back-to-back of the 1995 Judge Dredd movie and the 2014 Carl Urban Dredd film, just simply titled Dredd. I might have the dates wrong, but I'm going to stick with 1995 and 2014 just for the hell of it. And, like, yeah, I had a really interesting time watching these two films back to back. On the same day, I might add. The first one, Judge Dredd, starring Sylvester Stallone, which I love how all the advertising was just Stallone, Judge Dredd. Like, someone might have accidentally thought, hey, I'd like 2 tickets to see Stallone, Judge Dredd. Like, what? you know? But, yeah, it's just Judge Dredd. But this was back in the 90s when movie titles were packed in with the lead actor's name, especially just the last name, as sort of a marketing gimmick. They don't really do this that much anymore, but in the 90s, they did it everywhere. It was never just the title like Judge Dredd. It was always Stallone, Judge Dredd, Cruise, Mission Impossible, Schwarzenegger, Collateral Damage. I mean, just the last actor's name on everything. Lundgren, Blackjack. He kind of started doing B movies in the 90s. But, you know, just 90s was filled with that. And, yeah, so... The story of Judge Dredd is based off the 2000 AD comic book. I think it was a British comic book publication, and it followed this post-apocalyptic world where the entire planet was essentially dead except for this one massive city called Mega City 1. And essentially, law had to change after this terrible world-ending event that basically irradiated the entire planet. It probably was nuclear war. It usually is that. And essentially, the city, they came up with a new law structure, which is basically the judges. And essentially, a judge is both judge, jury, and executioner. They're kind of like legalized vigilantes, but they all wear uniforms. So essentially, a judge will see a person committing a crime, they will dictate how severe the punishment should be, either 5 years in prison or something, and then if the crime is severe enough to execute, they will be the executioner. All within, like, the matter of, like, a minute. So, no more trials, no more court dates. Probably saves a lot of money in terms of the government not having to deal with all that stuff. But it is kind of horrifying when you think about it. But, you know, that was kind of the point of the comic book. I mean, I believe, I've never read the comic books, okay? But from what I understand, like, in the comic books, they even start depicting Judge Dredd as a sort of futuristic fascist. And kind of, it was a satire on a lot of things. And so, you know, the comic book series has a massive following. And so when they announced in the 90s that it was getting an official movie, not just a kind of knockoff movie based on a sub-property of 2000 AD, if you know which movie I'm talking about, score for you. Because I am talking about a specific movie that is based in the Judge Dredd universe, but they, like, make no reference to Judge Dredd, and, like, honestly, you might have even seen this movie, but if you don't know the story behind the movie, you would never know that it's part of Judge Dredd, or 2000 AD's comic book lineup. So, good for you if you know exactly what movie I'm talking about. But, Yeah, so when they announced in the 90s that they were making a Judge Dredd film, fans obviously got excited, but there were probably a few that were hawkish simply because of this scene. No, 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 no! Yeah, so apparently in the comic books, Judge Dredd never ever took his helmet off. Alright? Ever. It was like Master Chief. Alright? No one knows what Master Chief looks like simply because you never see him without his helmet on. Okay? Same thing with Judge Dredd. The only thing you ever see of Judge Dredd's face is his jaw. Okay? His massive jaw. Okay? You never see his face. You only ever see maybe a silhouette of him taking his helmet off and he's in the shadows. Right? So when that scene happened, fans clearly lost their collective shit. Like, this is not a Judge Dredd movie. He took the mask off. Why did they do that? This is so wrong on so many levels. I mean, like, the only way I can explain it for a non-Judge Dredd fan is, imagine if they did a Snake Eyes movie where they took his mask off and they never had his mask on and you just saw Snake Eyes' face for the entire time in the G.I. Joe movie. I mean, could you imagine how pissed off fans would be if they did that? They did that. Was it successful? Did it bomb? I wonder why. Like, when you have a character who is known for never showing their fucking face, maybe it's a good idea to not show their fucking face. Just saying. But that aside, if you're not a huge Judge Dredd fan and you can accept the fact that the only time Judge Dredd has his helmet on is at the very beginning and at the very end when he puts it back on as he drives away, then you might actually have a fun time with this movie, because something a lot of people don't know, this is the quintessential 90s action film. If you don't understand what that means, if you don't know what the 90s was like, and you would like to know what the 90s was like, watch this movie, okay? This is the most 90s cheesy action film you will ever see, alright? Case in point, the main song created for this film by a rock band was the Dredd song by The Cure, okay? The main song was created by The Cure, okay? And the main Judge Dredd suit, okay? Not all the costumes, but just the main suit itself was designed by Versace, okay? So you have an action movie in the 90s where the main song was made by The Cure and the main suit was designed by fucking Versace, okay? Only in the 90s would you have seen shit like this happen, alright? Only in the 90s. Because nothing says post-apocalypse and Judge Dredd more than The Cure and fucking Versace, alright? It was the 90s. It was a different time, okay? This movie is pure 90s cheese. It has so many cliches that it's just going off a checklist of cliches, okay? You have the disgraced hero who's like amazing at everything, and of course he makes it out okay at the end, driving off in the sunset as everyone's cheering him on. They did that all the time in the 90s. They did none of this meta dark shit that you saw in the late 2000s, early 2010s, okay? They didn't do any of that. It was always happy ending in the 90s, alright? You have the comic relief. Freaking Rob Schneider, okay? This was the worst aspect of the movie for me, because I did not need this, but then again, this is a 90s cheesy action film, okay? Every cheesy 90s action film had the comic relief, okay? True Lies had it, alright? I mean, True Lies is one of the biggest 90s action films you can think of, and it had Tom Arnold as the comic relief, okay? I could probably name off 20 more, and just, you get my point. every 90s action film had to have a comic relief. And in this one, it was Rob Schneider. Because nothing says post-apocalypse in Judge Dredd more than fucking Rob Schneider. Okay? Like, he just does not fit in this film. And it's laughably sad how bad out of place he is in this film. But you know what? It was a 90s cheesy action film. So, yeah, he's in there. You gotta make do with it. Alright? But that's not the only cliche. Other cliches are like the main love interest, Diane Lane. She has this particular talent that's useful, and it's shown off as being super important, but ultimately it's not that important. And of course, she's also there to fight the main female villain that the main character can't fight, because if the main character fights the main female antagonist, then he's going to come off as an asshole. So you need a main female protagonist to fight with the main female antagonist, okay? They did this all the time in the 90s, okay? Just movie after movie. They still do it to an effect even today, but not as much as they did in the 90s, alright? And then the main antagonist, Ahmad Asante. What can I say about him? Like, this guy, he has done some pretty good acting in his career. And when this movie happened, it was like, okay, I know this is going to be a shitty movie, but you know what? It seems like a lot of fun. And I'm just going to go all out with it. I'm just going to have as much fun as I can with it. And you can totally see it from his presentation of the villain in this movie. Because, like, there are scenes, he is just so over the top. I mean, there's just this scene, like, this shouldn't have worked, but somehow he made it work to where it's just, like, batshit crazy fun, and just go with it.
Now I want fear racing through every street. You want fear? I'm fear. You want chaos? I'm the chaos. You want a new beginning? Here. I am the new beginning.
And I like how after that scene, this guy did not see him scream over. It's just like, okay. I mean, even the ending is cliche, where everyone's cheering as the hero's riding off to continue the good fight. I mean, like, how many movies have done that, okay? I mean, they've been doing that ending since the 50s, and by the time it got to the 90s, it was a cliche. And now, I will give credit where credit's due. I do like the design of the Versace costume. I mean, okay, the codpiece is a bit much, but you know what? The helmet, the shoulder, you know, I guess you call it football armor, but it doesn't look like football armor because it's totally impractical. But they were going for the comic aesthetic, okay? They were trying to replicate the comic. They weren't going for, hey, is this going to look weird on film? Nah, we're going with the comic. This was during a time when the writing wasn't great, but the attention to detail trying to bring characters off the page to the big screen was spot on. I mean, literally comic book characters in the 90s and early 2000s, apart from a couple examples, felt like they were ripped out of the comic book pages. And that is something missing with comic book movies and novel adaptations today. It's like, hey, do we want to use the original costume design? No, that's design stupid. Let's do something black and sleek, okay? But like more and more comic book movies, they're just less and less adapting what you've seen in the pages and in like the books, in the original games, and they're doing like these different designs with the costumes. They're casting actors who look nothing like the original characters on the pages and who act nothing like them. The personality is completely different, and so even if they were to cast someone who had a similar personality, you know, I could see that, but I mean, this day and age, personality is different, the character is different. But like with Judge Dredd, as cheesy as this movie is, man, did that look like the comic book? I mean, I have to say. And so, another thing I really liked was the ABS robot. Like, good gosh, that thing, it didn't move that much, and it couldn't do a lot with him, but man, that thing was so awesome. That thing just looked so cool. Probably the one thing that seemed a little odd was just like how futuristic the city felt. Like there were parts of the city that felt like, oh, there was a world war that happened. I mean, like, oh, there's a wasteland outside these city walls. Like some of the cities, they just feel like what the world might feel like in 200 years. All right, and there were parts that felt like, you know, a crime-infested gang alley. But I mean, the only time I got like that wasteland feel was outside of the city walls when you were at that prison and when you were out in like the desert with, you know, Judge Dredd and whatever Rob Schneider's name was. I don't know. But inside the city, it never felt like they were living in a post-apocalyptic world. So, I don't know, maybe a diehard comic book fan can actually say, no, that's how it was like in the comic, or they may go, yeah, no, the comic was a little bit more dry than that. So, yeah, I'm just, you know, throwing my thoughts out here. Ultimately, Sylvester Stallone, I didn't feel like he was giving his best performance, but then again, it was a 90s Sylvester Stallone action film. What were you expecting, okay? I mean, during this time, the guy didn't really need to act. He just needed to show up, do some cool action scenes, and throw a couple of one-liners out there, and people were happy with that. I mean, hell, I don't even know if he was a fan of this property. I think he just kind of got the call one day, and that call probably went something like this. Yeah, what is it? Oh, comic book movie, huh? Well, what's it about? Really? I get to be a cop, huh? It's not a cop, it's like cop. You lose me already, man. But hey, you know what? I don't know. I already got like a couple of projects and works and whatnot, and so I don't know if this is really right for me. You know, I mean, it sounds like a lot of fun. I mean, are you sure? I mean, this has quite a production value already set to it. You could get quite a bit of money for this. I will ask you this though: is Arnold trying to get it? I don't know. Let me check. Hey, is Schwarzenegger trying to get this role? No. Yeah, he's trying to get it. I'll do it. I kind of feel like that's how the conversation probably went. And so, ultimately, is this a great movie? No. Is this a good movie? Not really. Is it a decent movie? You're getting closer there. I won't say this is a bad movie. I won't say that this is a terrible movie. I mean, if you're trying to compare it with something like, you know, Godfather, then yeah, this is going to be the shittiest movie of all time. If you're just looking for a fun, cheesy 90s action movie that will give you kind of an idea of what the 90s was like in terms of the quality of movies they had, then yeah, check this out because you'll have fun. If you're a diehard fan of the comic books, don't watch this because you'll absolutely hate that Sylvester Stallone took his mask off. Okay? Because when you pay so much money for Sylvester Stallone to come on screen, you're probably not going to want his face obscured unless you're making the Suicide Squad. But that being said, yeah, so if you're just looking for a fun action romp through the 90s, definitely check this movie out. If you need your acting to be a little bit better, if you need your dialogue to be a little bit better, if you need, you know, your writing to be a little bit better, maybe you should move on and check something else out instead. So, that's been my review for the 1995 Stallone Judge Dredd movie. And my name is Chris with 11th Hour Reviews, and that is...